back, everybody, and thanks to the folks still with us on the live stream. Aminah, do you want to start by asking one of the questions that stood out for you from the...
Yes, so one question was, what sort of action can people take back that will really help, like that will appeal to the mainstream or change the mainstream in some way, and that will help challenge that? So you can raise your hand to answer that, but what's one action you can think of? Sorry, is anyone? Okay.
I think Carolynne.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what I said earlier. It's about finding one's way of deepening the relationship with the land and with the waters and with the being, and returning home to that relationship that our ancestors had. And, you know, taking that time to prioritize that relationship, just as we value all the other relationships in our lives, to prioritize our relationship with Mother Earth in that way equally.
You're all experts. Anybody else have answers to that?
I can chime in really quick, actually, for a quick note. Although I see Madeleine and others have their hand up, so I'll be very brief. But I think one of the reoccurring messages, that I've heard throughout, you know, pretty much every speaker's presentation is, you know, the importance of nature, you know, but also that it's all around us already, right? And sometimes we have this sense where you have to go somewhere far or deep into wilderness or whatnot, when it's right in our backyard, it's right in our balconies, it's on our windowsill, it's in our parks, it's schools. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. As we all know, we're all part of nature, but it's so good for us, both mentally and physically and cognitively. It's good for our communities, and it's all around us, even in an urban setting like Toronto. So let's take advantage.
Madeleine? One second, now you're unmuted. You can.
Okay. What we really need to do is be kind to each other and to Mother Earth. Always be conscious of what is around us in the environment, and stop overusing it and abusing it.
Thank you, Madeleine.
Particularly abusing it.
Allie, would you like to ask, or Ambika?
I would say, like, coming from, again, an immigrant perspective, is you're coming into a new country. You're coming onto indigenous lands. We need to be very careful of where we are and how we're building our relationship with it. And learning from the land, as Carolynne has mentioned, as Madeleine has mentioned, several speakers have mentioned, that is of primary importance. And the feeling that the settlement sector has, that immigrants are not interested in these issues, is something that really needs to change. So, thank you.
Thank you, and that's true. As settlers, we know nothing of the land we're coming on, so we could harm it. We harm it much more. And so thank you for pointing that out, Ambika. I think we had Krystyn as well that wanted to chime in.
I love and appreciate what others said about connecting to the land and connecting to water in our case. To that, I would just add that there's the one thing that people could do that really makes an enormous difference is changing your own perspective or expectations of what you will find when you do connect with nature, especially if you are in an urban environment. So if someone tells you that pollution is normal, you don't have to believe that. If someone tells you that you don't have a right to access the water, or you don't belong in nature, you don't have to believe that. And that most powerful change that I've seen in my life and career comes from people who aren't willing to accept that things have to be the way they are. And so that as a starting point, I think is really powerful.
Thank you. Kind of going off that, another question that was recurring a few times was around waterways, because a few of you mentioned waterways, but without really talking about them precisely, and how our activities could impact waterways. So I wanted to hear more about some concrete ways, like what things do we do every day impact waterways, and in what ways specifically? Lorraine?
Yeah, I think one of the really important things that we could do that would have a great deal of impact is in every way possible, encourage the infiltration of the water that falls on the land, encourage the infiltration of that water into the land and down to the groundwater. What we've tended to do is just sort of, funnel it into pipes and sewer systems to go, off to either treatment or directly into the lake. And so the ways that we can encourage that infiltration have to do actually with permeable surfaces and planting those permeable surfaces. And what happens in natural systems is that those native plants, and let's say native wet meadow plants, they encourage the infiltration of that water down into the groundwater to replenish it. So I think if we had, rain gardens all over the city, in all places, schools, community centers, libraries, yards, if we had these rain gardens, we really wouldn't need to build those big pipes that are that are being built at great expense to deal with an issue that we could deal with on a landscape scale with plants.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Madeleine, you're on mute.
Oh,
there.
am I mute?
You're good now.
Okay. Further to that, the lakeshore floods regularly now, the Lakeshore Road. A decade ago, it didn't. It never flooded, but they have paved almost all of the exhibition grounds now. And so all that water that was going down into Mother Earth through the sand that was there is now flowing off onto the Lakeshore Road. We're getting ourselves. Yes.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the green roof movement will help with so many things in terms of water catchment, reducing stormwater runoff, and helping to reduce energy costs in our buildings. There has been some effort to subsidize that, but and require it even in new buildings, but I think that's an area that needs to be completely ramped up.
It's okay to build off just, another term that was thrown out there really quick related to water, particularly in an urban setting, is stormwater, right? And this is a really, pretty common misconception. I'm going to try just sharing my screen really quick. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but stormwater, it does not get treated before it enters into our natural waterways. So, here's just a simple activity sheet, but what it's showing is that the water that, comes off our roads and into our gutters, whatnot, whether it's sidewalks, streets, goes into storm drains, it's emptied directly into local waterways. There's no treatment facilities that are, that are treating that water. So you can imagine the impact on wildlife as well as us. And that gets back to the benefits of green roofs and low impact development and naturescaping and all that's been talked about, giving nature a chance to do what it does best, right? Filter up that water and clean it for us. And yeah, nature's pretty amazing that way.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that when thinking as consumers, people who are smokers, those cigarette butts that are often discarded onto the earth that eventually can wash into those waterways, or even during the winter season when people are over salting those sidewalks as well. So just having those considerations as individuals is what we can do as far as reducing those pollutants in our everyday activities.
Thank you for that. I think Krystyn has been waiting for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, but the stormwater that people have talked about. So there was a question that popped up on the YouTube thread quite a while ago. I can't remember who asked it, but it's related to what we've just heard. So the reason why this untreated wastewater goes into the lakes and rivers is because that's actually how our infrastructure is designed. Our city built the pipes so that they would empty into the lake. So there is, in addition to rainwater that falls on the ground and becomes stormwater, there's a fair amount of raw sewage. So what goes down your toilet or what goes down your dishwasher or your laundry machine, a fair amount of that in places like Toronto and Vancouver and other big cities does end up in the water as well. So when I was talking earlier about thinking what you flush, we do mean quite literally that all the soaps, all the medicines, any materials that you flush or wash down a drain in these older cities are likely to end up in the water. So anything that we can do to keep garbage out of the wastewater system also keeps garbage out of our lakes and rivers, and anything we can do to keep stormwater in the ground in our gardens where it belongs, it also helps to reduce the pressure on those pipes.
Thank you for that. So we're going to ask one more question to help us wrap up. And it's about food and products. So some of it has already been addressed with the conversations we've had, but can you provide tips on how changes to consumptions of food and products can help restore biodiversity? So just, yeah.
Sunday?
I don't know if it's an end product, but it's, I mean, one of the contributions of urban gardeners is seed saving and bringing heritage varieties back into the mainstream and making sure that we don't lose them, because monoculture in the conventional agriculture system relies on a very, very small percentage of varieties available. So it's really important, and the seed library is the way to share that and grow them out and share the seed for next year. So I think that can't be underestimated in terms of our food biodiversity.
Thank you.
Other responses? This feels like my online learning classes sometimes.
I'm happy to chime in until someone else raises their hand. But you know, I think food systems in general, as Cheyenne talked about, and as well as others. I mean, there's so many different issues that, you know, related to sustainability, related to biodiversity, climate change, that could really be focused on. But maybe that in itself is a bit of, you know, something to think about, is just learning, right? We're all interested in different things. We're all passionate about different things, you know, and taking the time to educate oneself and others and our family members and friends, right? Because we know how important it is, that the messenger when it comes to talking about these sort of really complicated issues, and really making decisions related to food systems that are meaningful to you, right? Local, organic, you know, growing yourself, right? Supporting, you know, non-GMO. Like, there's just so many different angles you could take that all connects to biodiversity and climate change, because the world is connected. If there's anything we know, everything's connected to everything else. That's Ecology 101, right? But anyways, it's just my 2 cents, is to take action after learning and sharing, talking about it with your friends and family, I think is essential. So.
Thank you. Carolynne, yeah.
It's not so much about food products, but when I think of the gardening, doing avid gardening, part of a.
I think your mic might be a little off.
Oh.
I can't hear you very well.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. It's not so much about food products, but when I'm thinking about people who are avid gardeners or earth workers tending to the land, growing food, thinking about those other plants that are popping up that weren't intentionally planted there by human hands, per se. Those plants that are often labeled as weeds, as invasive, because many of those plants, you know, with creation, from an Indigenous perspective, we say that every being has a role. And, you know, many of those plants that might be popping up in the garden might be food sources. They might be medicine, or be for other utilitarian purposes. And so instead of just pulling them out with no regard, taking that time and that care, because we do when harvesting those tomatoes or other foods that have been intentionally planted by people, taking as much care to remove those particular plants that we might not want in our garden in a good way, and finding a way to use those plants instead of just quickly discarding them into the compost. You know, for us to take that responsibility to find out, who is this plant? What's the relationship of this plant with other beings? Because, you know, some of those plants could be fixing the soil, and many of those plants that are intentionally grown there that are food sources have much more nutrients than anything that's planted. Their tap roots go down up to 100 to 200 feet deep, bringing up those trace minerals. So finding a different way of being in relationship with those plants that are coming up in our garden.
Right, beautiful. Well, folks, except if someone else has a pressing one, we're gonna kind of wrap up. And what we do usually in our youth group meetings is we like to have a checkout question to have everybody speak, and also usually it's a somewhat fun question. We try to make them fun. So obviously this one is going to be obvious, but I want to hear what your favorite species of living being is. Now, it can be a plant, it can be an animal, it can really be whatever you want, but we'd love to hear a few words on what it would be and why, to get us to start knowing a little more nature and the species around us. So anybody that wants to start, feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll just go around in the speakers. Don't be shy. Carolynne.
I would say the water. Water is that giver of life, medicine. Water flows within us. Before we're birthed into this world, we were encased in that fluid, that water, within our mother's womb. And when we're in grief, we shed water. And so when we're thinking about that water, finding a way to be in relationship with that water. If we ever have grief that comes and we're letting our tears, just let them flow. There's no shame in grief. In fact, releasing that grief is healthy. And when we're releasing those tears, to take in that water, replenish the water that we've lost from our bodies. And maybe just kind of be consciously aware, and maybe offering some gratitude when we take that water into our life. Like, she flows within us and around us.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Was it Madeleine?
I agree. Water is the most precious thing that we have got on the planet. It is life, and we have got more of it here in Ontario and the Great Lakes area. Not just the surface water in the lakes and rivers, but underground as well. We have more than any place else on the planet. We do not look after it well. We need to look after it much better. And water is the gift of life. It should be free. I have a sign in my front yard that says, "Say no to Nestle's," because they are pumping groundwater in vast quantities and selling it. Water, nobody should pay for water other than the simple services that you have to pay for with your city taxes.
Thank you. The sign I have up there, "Save Our Water," was from a protest against Nestle taking over water sources. Krystyn?
I'm going to shock everyone who knows me and say otter, because they are so much fun, and they basically just play all day long, but also because they used to live in the Don River and the Don River Valley. And so to me, otter are the symbol of what a restored Toronto would look like, because otter eat fish, which means that they can only survive and play and make their little mudslides in a place where they have food, and they can only eat food if the fish can survive in the river, and the river has to be clean and has to be healthy. So the day when we see otter playing in the Don River Valley again is the day that we know that we've won back Toronto's waters.
Thank you. Yeah, Lorraine.
It's impossible to pick a favorite species, but I just want to say that for me, trees are, they're just incredible beings, and especially the oak trees, which support the greatest number of caterpillars anyway, insects, moth and butterfly, larvae. The oaks support more than pretty much any other species of tree in this area anyway. So oaks are pretty fabulous.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else? Colin?
Sure, I can jump in. So like many parents and caregivers during this time, I imagine I'm not alone in spending a lot of time with young kids in creative play, which is lots of fun. So my daughter loves nothing more than to pretend to be animals. So my go-to animal these days usually is a red-tailed hawk, and it's an incredible bird of prey, native obviously to our area. You hear them and you can see them, and actually the sound always reminds me, back in leading nature walks for years now, but it's sometimes referred to as the Hollywood bird because it's such a common call. It's so majestic. It's used in movies and TV shows all the time to show any type of bird of prey, eagles or falcons, just because the sound is so just powerful. So keep an eye out. Red-tailed hawks, they're all over the place. They're incredible bird, and yeah, great question. Thanks.
Thanks, Colin. We actually see them at every single protest we have at Queen's Park, and we notice every time.
Yeah.
Ambika or Sunday, maybe? We're good here.
I don't know too much about the different species here. Again, I won't be able to choose based on what is the best, but if I had to go back, I would choose the tiger. Because that's like the umbrella species for saving large areas. It's a majestic animal, it's a beautiful animal, and if we can protect it, water, soil, land, trees. So I would go back to that, and maybe relevant here could be the caribou or the bear, any of the big animals, if we can saving a large area. So for me,
I love that answer. Great. Sunday, go for it.
Well, somewhere in between the last two, I love trees. They are the most successful plants on the planet. But for getting through COVID era, it's my fur babies, my cats, that I'm really glad to have to hug and pet and things like that. So I got to put in a word for the felines, the domestic felines.
Well, thank you so much to all of you, and thank you very much for everybody that has been watching. Aminah, I don't know if you want to answer that question, but I know you want to say a few words before we close.
Oh, well, I just wanted to again thank you for attending, to all our speakers here today for sharing such valuable knowledge that people can take home and reflect on, and also wanting to thank people in the beginning for making some sort of commitment to racial justice and to being anti-racist. And I think that's something that I hope people will carry on from today, with achieving biodiversity or with addressing any crisis, remembering those that are marginalized, those that are vulnerable, those that are most vulnerable. So I think those are my last words, though. And also thank you, the organizers, who've done a fabulous job.
Absolutely, yeah. A round of applause for the organizers. There's a tech team behind the scene. There's people that thought of all these wonderful speakers. And Aminah, it was a pleasure to co-host with you. And thank you to all our speakers, to our viewers. And we hope that you have a lovely rest of the evening, and to see you all soon, probably digitally first, and then back in the streets or in nature in Ontario. Have a good evening.